Hello, everyone. I'm really glad to welcome you to and hoorays and welcome in the chat too. Uh, so thrilled that you could join us today for a panel in which we have representatives from today four, not five. Unfortunately, Heather Maring could be with us today. Four different medieval associations or medieval Renaissance associations in Canada as well as in the United States. And I am Virginia Blanton, or Ginny, and I'm from the University of Missouri in Kansas City, and am de facto the president forever of the Mid-America Medieval Association, now that the 8 medievalists who used to be at my institution have all retired and left me holding the bag. Mama, as we call it, has been around for 50 years, 52, I think. And so we are at a crossroads of thinking about what does the future look like. Something that is really pressing for me and wanting to honor the heritage of Mama, but also wanting to celebrate all the things that Mama has brought, both to my life and to my students' lives and to our institution and beyond. So it was part of my role as a member of the CARA, Medieval Academy of America, the CARA Committee on Regional Associations and, oh, I blew it. Sorry, Lauren. I always do this. On regional associations and programs, I think. Programs, anyway, CARA. And so as part of my role there, it has been one of my chief foci to think about how do we continue to sustain medieval studies and an interest in these organizations beyond and into the 21st century. So in the next 50 years, for instance, for Mama, but what do we need to do? What do we need to be thinking about, especially in a time of shrinking resources? We know state funding is shrunk. We know that faculty lines are fewer. Retirements often are not, lines are not filled. So I asked this question and posed it to the CARA committee and about how we can maybe share information about what's working in a given organization and tips and ideas that we could implement in our own. I will start by saying that I am completely sorry that the title I came up for this meeting, What Makes Great Medieval Associations, has an unfortunate association with some body of a belief that I never intended. And so I'll say instead, this is a panel focused on medieval and what medieval needs to be sustaining. So sustaining medieval studies in the 21st century. So with that overview, I'd like to introduce to you names that will, of course, be all too familiar. Kristen Bezio from the Rocky Mountain Medieval and Renaissance Association. Natalie Grinnell from Southeastern Medieval Association. Unfortunately, Heather can't be with us from the Medieval Association of the Pacific. Shannon McSheffrey from the Canadian Society of Medievalists. And Montserrat, Piera, should have asked you about the last name, Delaware Valley Medieval Association. So what I'd like to do is allow each of the presenters 5 to 7 minutes, and then we'll open it up and have a larger conversation among the attendees about what's really working and what we can focus on as we move forward in the future. So thank you to our panelists. And how about we just go in the order that I introduced you, and then we'll see how it all shakes out as a conversation.
I think that means I'm first. So as Ginny said, I'm Kristen Bezio. I am the current president of the Rocky Mountain Medieval and Renaissance Association. Don't worry about it. Nobody ever said it right the first time. When my partner's ancestors moved to this country, somebody changed the spelling very dramatically. It's French. So, good times. One of the things that I want to talk about for WIMRA, as we call it, is that we pivoted pretty hardcore in 2020, not away from the ethos that was sort of structuring our organization. We decided at some point right around 2016 that we were going to commit ourselves to accessibility, and that was going to be a thing that we believed wholeheartedly in. And so following 2020, so 2020 and 2021, obviously pandemic, we had fully virtual conferences, but we have committed to making all of our conferences fully hybrid since. And that for us has actually been a really big way to sustain our community, because it means that folks who maybe one year or maybe every year are dealing with that lack of funding, right? You know, financial outlays become increasingly difficult. We have lower registration rates for our virtual participation, but all of our stuff is hybrid. Having just been on a virtual panel at Kalamazoo because it was in the middle of my graduation. And so I, as an associate dean, I could not actually leave. They have hybrid panels, they have in-person panels, and they have virtual panels. We really wanted at RIMRA to make everything fully hybrid insofar as we're able to do. And that's something that we just decided we were going to commit to support graduate access, to support access for scholars with disabilities or who might be immunocompromised, to support access for undergrads, access for contingent faculty, and access for international scholars. And so even though, you know, some of our conferences may be in very out of the way places, so in 2 weeks, we will be in Logan, Utah, which requires an 1.5-hour drive once you fly into Salt Lake City. We still have 50 folks who are registered, which for a small venue is actually really good. Most of the time, so last year we were in Cedar City, Utah, in conjunction with the Wooden O. I think we had over 80 attendees there, because a lot of those attendees are able to attend virtually. Or, you know, we had a board member who had to switch to virtual and could still present, despite the fact that he had to evacuate his house because of wildfires. So it just creates a more, his house was fine, he was fine, his family was fine, just for reference. But it creates a more accessible space to be able to have those conversations. And when everyone is really comfortable and familiar with that hybrid model, it's easy to just keep doing it, because it does allow for those conversations to keep taking place, even when life happens. And even when you might be in more dire financial straits. So for us, that was actually a really big move. And interestingly, all it really takes is for a couple of organizers to have institutions with institutional Zooms. So we don't have to pay to have, you know, all of this fancy pants tech support. My laptop runs one room, our treasurer's laptop runs the other room if we don't have access to a place on site. So you do have computers in rooms and cameras in rooms, and that's great. It makes it even easier. It makes the quality better. But we can and have run hybrid conferences using board members' laptops. It's not, you know, fancy and perfect, but it is a way to still allow that to happen without increasing the outlay on the part of the organization in terms of cost. Because I'm flying with my laptop anyway, it's going to be there. I change my name to whatever the session title is, and off we go. So that to us was really important to do. It's also helped us with the membership question, because we do require membership, but our membership fees are $27. They're really low. And so it's easy for folks to be members, to participate virtually, but still be members. And for those of us who do have access to more institutional funds, we go in person, and we're able to, you know, foot the cost for travel and hotel and all of those sorts of things. The other thing that we really work hard at is providing more support for contingent and student attendees. And so we have 2 grants that we run to offset travel cost. So we will cover the cost of registration and membership, and then I think it's $250 towards travel costs. We have one fund that's set up for non-tenure track faculty. And so that could be contingent faculty, that could be independent scholars, that could be folks who are not actually teaching faculty, but have, for instance, completed a master's degree. And then we have another fund for students that's the same thing. So it covers their registration, and we do up to 3 of those generally per year. Sometimes we've done 4 if we feel like we're doing well in terms of that cost being offset by other folks. And we have an option in registration for folks to donate as little as $1 or as much as they want. And so we'll often get very small donations, but in aggregate, they build up. And so we have that way to kind of continue maintaining those specific funds. Like that's what people donate to, is to help support other folks to attend the conference. And so for us, it's that plus those of us who attend regularly really work hard to try and make sure that it is a welcoming community. We have professionalization panels. We've done workshops with graduate students on how to present so that there's a little bit less anxiety around actually giving papers. And we really go out of our way. So all of our little name tags for in-person folks, of course, will indicate how many RIMRAs somebody has been to. And folks who've been around for a while try and deliberately be welcoming to folks who have only 1 or 2 little medieval huts on their name tag, because it's really important to us to create this kind of continuation of attendees. It was done to me when I was a baby grad student all the way back in 2010. And that everybody was really welcoming and invited me to come back. And then I won an award, which, that helped. But I came back the following year, and then they put me on the board and have been there ever since. So I have been to every RIMRA since 2010. And that's the kind of community that we work very, very hard to cultivate, and that the board just agreed that that was going to be our thing. We're just going to try and love everybody and be really welcoming and really inclusive, and try to work hard to make sure that we're not falling into that trap that happens in academia so often of, oh, well, where are you from? And, oh, well, you don't have a PhD yet, so we're not going to let you on our, like, we don't care. And really it's about the ideas and the thought processes. And so we've leaned into that as much as we can. And that has led to a lot of loyalty. We have a lot of folks who do RIMRA and every year. I'm one of them. I'm not actually a medievalist. I'm an early modernist, so I do the RSA, but I do Kalamazoo. But I always do RIMRA because we have a community that we've actually built up, and we add more people to it, and we get people to keep coming back because that's really where we've leaned in. And so we work on it in terms of financial outlay. We try and we make our fees as high as we need to cover our costs, and that's about it. We encourage donations. We encourage folks to very deliberately think about what it is that our community needs. And sometimes that's help with job market stuff, and sometimes that's help with publication, but to really think about how do we support the folks that we have so that they keep coming back, and then they then start contributing ideas and moving forward. And so that's really how we've chosen to build sustainability into the organization is, we're going to throw a party and we're going to try and have fun and make everybody feel like they belong, no matter who they are or where they come from.
That's great, Kristen. Thank you. I really love how many times have you been on the name badge? That's really wonderful. Natalie, let's turn to you.
Okay. I actually wrote a little bit out because I'm suffering the Kalamazoo post exhaustion, I guess, still. So when you sent the message of all the different kinds of challenges we face, they did a good job summarizing a lot of them. SEMA is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. It technically could be our 52nd if we hadn't missed a couple SEMAs. Looking back over our archives showed me that our finances have been a struggle several different times in our history, but they are not now, as has the increasingly desperate job market. So we've been through a lot over the years. Our organization is doing well. Our dues are not onerous. They've remained set at $25 for many years. I couldn't quite figure out how many. And we've managed to persevere in spite of having to cancel our conference twice in the last 5 years. The first time due to COVID and the second due to Hurricane Helene. If we had had the ability to do it virtually, it would have been impossible since many of us were out of, including me, didn't have power for 3 weeks or more. So that one, we are going to be 2 years out when we have our fall conference. We have a journal which is indexed in the sort of major bibliographical places such as MLA, JSTOR, and it's dramatically improved over the course of 38 years. Our biggest challenge lately, we have two. One's accessibility, as the previous panelist, Kristen, described, and I'll be frank, we have failed in every way to do anything about it. We've talked about it, but there is a conflict within the membership about the ability or even commitment to moving to hybrid or virtual panels. I suspect this indeed will happen, but a couple of us, more senior scholars, probably have to rotate out of position before the next generation takes control and makes it happen. I think it should happen sooner, but I don't quite have the power to do that. The other thing is we are having a generational change. Everything has changed in academia since I entered it. And as both the boomers and the Gen Xers head rapidly toward retirement, new, younger medievalists are moving into our place, and not as rapidly as we would like in SEMA. Our strength has been the personal connections we've made over the decades, and expanding those to embrace more medievalists of color, younger medievalists, contingent medievalists has been the focus of my own tenure as president. Our most effective effort has come from an award, a new award called the Lorraine Koshansky Stock Endowment for Innovation and Medieval Studies, and I am going to drop the link here into the chat. It's officially described as an ongoing program in support of engagement with any field of medieval studies. And Lorraine is one of our senior members. I think she's been to all but one SEMA in the past 50 years. And she dropped a large endowment on us, aimed at early career scholars without tenure. So any applicant from grad student to high school teacher to tenure track, early career person who's within 10 years of their PhD, can apply for funding grants of up to $1,500 in support of research travel, expenses for scholarly materials, innovative teaching, or publication subvention on topics that intersect with the study of the Middle Ages. We began giving the award in 2021 when we resumed after COVID. So far, we've been able to support 11 projects, ranging from archival research in Europe to software purchases for digital humanities programs, to budget support for an undergraduate conference in medieval studies, which was really successful. Our winners have been grad students, tenure track professors, and contingent faculty, and each winner subsequently presents their project to the conference itself with help from SEMA if necessary for travel and expenses. Spreading word of this award beyond our immediate membership, both to draw on more scholarly engagement and open SEMA to a new generation, has been a bit difficult. I think we're moving from one kind of social media accounts to another, and what has happened with the recent takeover of, I guess they're calling it X now, but it has made people leave that area. So we've had a little bit of trouble with communication outside of our membership. But I have young people working on it, thank goodness, who understand how to use a phone a whole lot better than I do. There's now an option on our conference and registration forms so that people can donate to the stock fund, and our membership has steadily increased that initial endowment that way. The broader threat to medieval studies, of course, is the same threat to all of academia, and it makes me really nervous. Like several other organization presidents, I signed the call for constructive engagement letter posted by the American Association of Colleges and Universities. Even though the letter is not particularly hostile in tone, my own college president has been unable to sign, and having the name of one Wofford College representative on the page lends a certain amount of satisfaction to some of us. SEMA like most of your organizations, is independent in the sense that we don't depend on any government funding. We're not embedded in any state university system. And while that sometimes has meant that we have to do things close to the bone budget-wise, we also have no money for them to take away from us. And that gives us the ability to speak out when some other institution cannot. Getting membership to agree on what to say and when can be a challenge, but I'm hopeful that in the next few years we can provide some shelter, even if it's only intellectual shelter, from the I'm being dramatic here, but from the storm bearing down on us from a hostile and dangerous government administration. We can talk about other stuff later.
Okay, thank you, Natalie. I really, yes, you've highlighted a lot of the challenges and the threat, and I'm really glad that you've highlighted the Lorraine Stock Award, which is just such a fabulous, the way that it's framed in terms of innovation and the multiple things that are possible for that award are just really terrific. So, congratulations on that. Let's turn now to Shannon, who is from the Canadian Society of Medievalists.
Yeah, thanks, Ginny. So the CSM was founded in 1993, and it represents anybody working in medieval studies across Canada. And that brings up our first challenge, which is that we're a fairly small group. We have about 150 paid up members at any one time, but we're spread out over 6 time zones that make up the Canadian landmass. So another issue is that most of our members are Anglophone. There is, in fact, another world of medieval studies in French in Quebec, and I live in Quebec, so I know it well. We have relationships with the Quebec organization, but we're not all integrated, and that's kind of the way that the academic world in Canada works, in somewhat separate languages. Nonetheless, we welcome people working in French, and all of our work with members is in both English and French. I'll talk about that in a second, in another aspect of that as work for us. Now, in a pattern that might be undoubtedly is familiar to other regional associations, with a major medieval studies center in its midst, we have very little participation from the faculty in medieval studies at the University of Toronto, which is by far the largest concentration of medievalists in Canada. We do see their students, for whom our conference is seen as a friendly and low stakes way to give papers. We have an annual conference, which is a 3-day affair with about 60 people usually on the program. I think we have 65 this year. We're going to be holding it this year at the University of Waterloo in Southern Ontario. We require membership to present at the conference, which is frankly the best way that we have to gain new members. Like any small organization, we worry consistently about the numbers of our members. And like any medieval studies organization in North America, we're seeing a definite graying of the category of our membership with permanent academic employment. We have succeeded in attracting more student involvement, I think, over the last few years, and we've leaned into that idea, as we've seen with the other Kristen and Natalie, with their organizations. We like to think of ourselves as providing a venue for the mentorship of students and young scholars, and the only potential problem, which we're still a ways away from, but because of the almost cessation of hiring, especially outside of English literature, in medieval studies in Canada, there's going to be very few mentors. We're going to have more mentees than mentors, potentially in the future. We have both a student conference paper and dissertation prizes, and we offer students funds to assist travel to the conference. We actually had a special donation for that this year, and we were able to give almost $3,000 in travel assistance, which is very important given how far some people have to travel. We've just recently also targeted DEI, or as we call it, EDID funds for early career conference participants who identify as part of an equity-seeking group. We also offer some online events. This is something that especially we've worked up, from COVID onwards. They're in between our in-person conferences, which have been somewhat lightly hybrid, I'll put it. We, rather than fully hybrid, that's something that I think we'll need to be thinking more about in the future. We most recently had what we think of as a very successful panel discussion for our Best Book Prize winner, which I think is going to become an annual event. Of course, we're worried about the future of the interdisciplinary study of the Middle Ages. Our conferences are, nonetheless convivial and stimulating. And for many of us long-timers, they're an annual social as well as an intellectual highlight. And, for new participants, it's a great way, of course, for them to connect with other medievalists working and studying at Canadian universities. In addition to the conference, we have a journal, Florilegium, which is published annually. The journal has, frankly, had some problems of various kinds that relate both to an editorial problem, but also to the generalized issues that academic and journal publishing have been having over the last couple of years, especially. Our current editor, David Watt, has been working very hard to get the journal back on track, and we're hoping that that's going to happen in the next year or two. Now, we're not wealthy, as I imagine that none of the associations are. We're funded mostly by membership fees and conference fees, both of which we try to keep as low as we can. We have, I imagine this is true of all of us, we have no paid staff. The labor is performed by the executive, which is made up of 5 members, president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, past president, and then the editor of the journal. Together, we perform both the usual leadership tasks and all the administrative ones, up to and including the basic coding of the website and that sort of thing. And all emails, web pages, conference programs, policies, everything has to be produced in both English and French. This is absolutely necessary. We are committed to this as a Canadian organization, but unquestionably, it takes a lot of time. Again, in a refrain that's familiar more broadly in the academic sphere lately, not just in regional medieval studies associations, running such organizations involves a lot of uncompensated work. That work counts in a nebulous way for the executive does tend to be people with permanent academic positions, and it does count in our annual reviews in a nebulous sort of way, though to my knowledge, none of us receives any more concrete recognition. I imagine that's probably true of all of us on the panel. Now, just very lastly, we've had a recent challenge in that the infrastructure, and this is a uniquely Canadian issue, the infrastructure through which we've always until this year held our conference has first become troubled, and then just last week, at least temporarily, has collapsed. And that is that we've been part of the annual Canadian Meta Conference, known as the Congress of Humanities and Social Sciences, which gathers together learned associations, big and small, at a host university over a 10-day period. So we have had our 3-day conference as part of this Congress, as it is known. Now, for reasons that are obviously way too complicated to go into here, Congress has not met our needs as an association recently, and last summer we made the seemingly brave decision that in 2025 we would break off from Congress and meet independently. We were leaving it open as to whether we would return to Congress after that. The main issue is that Congress is very expensive. It's like costs about $350 Canadian to attend as part of Congress, which, as you can imagine, with your conference fees for yours, it's prohibitive. And so we have, however, I mean, we're not the only association that had this problem, and we just heard that Congress has actually canceled its 2026 big thing, which is a huge thing in humanities and social science academia in Canada. So we will still be meeting again independently next year. And so one of the issues that has come up is that we now need to find venues. We used to have the venue, in a sense, kind of thrust upon us by whatever Congress decided. And we would, but now it's, the president, that's me, who's going to take the flack if people don't like where it's going to be held. And we do, again, Canada being so large, we do have to try to acknowledge and recognize the different regions of Canada in making these decisions. And then we need to find somebody who would actually host us. So, yeah. Anyway, that's me.
Thank you, Shannon. And that is just really interesting information about where you had a permanent sort of hosting institution, and what that means for the future is one of the things I'm definitely struggling with myself. Let's turn to Montserrat Piera, and who is the representing the Delaware Valley Medieval Association.
Thank you, Virginia. Yes, I'm going to read a little bit. I just want to make sure that way I stay within the time limits. But I realize as you guys are speaking that our organization is in some ways, I thought it would be very similar, but in some ways it's actually very different. So I'll just describe a little bit what we do, and then I want to talk a little bit about strengths and challenges, or strengths and weaknesses, and some of the challenges that we face. But just for everybody's information, the Delaware Valley Medieval Association began in 1979 as part of the Lilly, Pennsylvania program, but was officially formed in 1983. Initially, it began as something in the University of Pennsylvania, but from 1983 on, then it became an independent regional association. And since that year, the DVMA has been meeting regularly to celebrate the contributions of medievalists from the Delaware Valley region, as far as north as New York, those are kind of our extremes, let's say, and as far south as Maryland, and all areas in between, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. Collectively, we represent faculty, graduate students, librarians, and museum curators from more than 40 colleges and universities, in addition to a sizable number of independent scholars in all disciplines in medieval studies. Excuse me. Thus, the purpose of our regional association was, from its inception, to provide a welcoming forum for intellectual exchange and collaboration between fellow medievalists in our region, and to forge professional and personal connections that support, sustain, and advocate for all aspects of medieval studies in the Delaware Valley region. The meeting since 1983, the DVMA has held its meetings across the greater Delaware Valley, as well as the Walters Art Museum, Rutgers University, and Johns Hopkins University. Among the frequent hosts and constant sponsors of DVMA are Penn's Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies, Princeton University, the Index of Medieval Art, and the Institute for Advanced Studies. The DVMA doesn't hold a larger conference like the other associations seem to do. What we do is we hold 3 meetings a year and a digital workshop geared to graduate students. Our meetings are usually one-day meetings, so we don't travel, we don't go outside of let's say, the Philadelphia area and the kind of the metropolitan area around in the Delaware Valley. Our programs feature local faculty and graduate students, but we often invite guest speakers from farther afield. The papers presented at our meetings represent the wide spectrum of medieval studies in the region and beyond: history, philosophy, theology, manuscript studies, religion, art history, gender studies, everything. Some of our meetings are in person, and others, but only since after the pandemic, are virtual. Meetings are open to everyone, but DVMA members will get a registration discount. And attendance to such events fluctuate between as little as 20 attendees to almost 200 in the case of a virtual webinar we hosted back in 2021. Furthermore, the DVMA has extended its reach beyond conferences. The association has established a web presence via a website, an online newsletter, email notifications of coming events, and an online archive of meeting programs since the Lilly, Pennsylvania program in 1979. Participation of graduate students is highly encouraged through reduced dues, free registration at programs, a recently created digital workshop, and representation on the Executive Council. Our governance structure is based, we have a constitution actually, which states that our association shall be governed by an elective executive council consisting of the president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, and 6 members at large serving staggered 3-year terms. In addition to these 10 executive membership roles, the Executive Council includes at least 1 doctoral student who manages graduate student outreach and participation in DVMA events and programming for a 2-year term. The DVMA offers 3 prizes yearly geared to supporting graduate students, a travel grant, a paper prize, and a digital project prize. The travel grant offers $1,000 to help defray costs of travel for research of the presentation or research. So like the other associations, we very strongly try to support the graduate students through the mentoring and the financial support, because after all, they are the future of our own organization, as well as the future of medieval studies. Anyway, so yeah, we have these 3 possibilities, and the paper prize is also awarded annually to a graduate student for a written project on the basis of its quality, originality, and clarity of scholarship. These are actually good resources for the graduate students. For graduate students in the region, we find that in fact, sometimes it's difficult to award them because we do not have enough applications. So this is one of the issues that we seem to have, that although we try to support the graduate students, sometimes the graduate students don't realize that they have those possibilities available to them. Not surprisingly, the pandemic has had a deleterious effect on the organization, like I'm sure it has for everybody else. In the years since the pandemic, we have had a considerable drop in attendance to in-person events, and it has been much more difficult to find hosts for our meetings, in part because institutions are less willing than before to utilize their budget to support our programming. And for an organization whose only source of income are the membership dues, like it's our case, it is hard for us to program events. In order to overcome this problem, we have collaborated closely with other organizations and institutions to make sure we could share costs. We have also organized several much cheaper virtual events with great success. However, this is not ideal, and it does not necessarily aid in the creation of a community of local and regional scholars, which is one of the intents of our organization. Over the years, our in-person meetings have been a wonderful way to meet and interact with other medieval studies scholars in an environment where we all feel isolated in our institutions because there's few of us. So the DVMA meetings were a way to actually be with people that were, that were studying this, or that were interested in medieval studies, but that didn't really have the cohort of faculty in their own institutions to discuss those issues, or to feel kind of included, or to feel that they were discussing the same issues. Traditionally, our meetings would actually last for a full day on Saturdays from 9 in the morning until 4 or 5, with lunch and a reception. We had some coffee, then we had some papers, lunch, and then a reception at the end. So as you can see, it was not just an intellectual exchange, it was also a social event, and it allowed all of us to get to know each other, and it was really a very positive experience. Due to budget constraints, of course, catering has become very expensive. We have increasingly shifted towards a different model, shorter meetings, usually from 1 p.m. to 4 or 5 p.m., with a coffee service or a reception, generally not both, although sometimes we manage, depending on who's the host and how much money they have. But many of us missed the more traditional approach, which allowed us to devote an entire Saturday to fruitful discussion of medieval issues in the middle of our tedious academic year. Our DVMA weekend meetings used to be the bit of nourishment that sustained us through the year before we could go to the Medieval Academy of America Conference or to Kalamazoo's bountiful banquet of medieval sessions. So things have changed and we adapt to the times, but obviously, you know, our initial model, I think, was much more rewarding for everybody. And we were, you know, but that was, of course, out before the pandemic. Now, I just want to talk a little bit about the strengths and weaknesses. And in our case, interestingly, I think that in a sense, one of our strengths is also our weakness at this point. And the fact is that our geographical positioning. The association is located in an area where the kind of the Delaware Valley area, where there are many universities and other institutions that focus on medieval studies. For example, just to name a few, the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton, the Index of Medieval Art, also at Princeton, the Bryn Mawr Library, the Schönberg Institute for Manuscript Studies, and the Rare Book Drug at the Free Library in Philadelphia, or also the Glencairn Museum at Bryn Athyn, just to name a few. Equally advantageous is the fact that in the Delaware Valley area, surrounded by urban areas, we can appeal to a much larger audience of medieval scholars than perhaps other regional associations. However, this geographical advantage can also be a drawback for an association such as ours. There is so much programming available at a relatively short distance to most of us that we constantly compete with other institutions. It is a wonderful thing that there are so many options for medievalists in the Delaware Valley region, but it also causes more scheduling conflicts. In other words, we're not the only game in town. And generally, we are the least important game in town, too, if we compare, for example, to other institutions or to other centers of medieval studies. Then another problem that we have is the decline of academic representation in medieval studies disciplines. When the association was created, there were at least one or two medievalists, and in some cases, many more, like at University of Pennsylvania, for example, where there were several medievalists. But there were at least at the time one or two medieval specialists at each of the 40 or so institutions in our area, even in very small colleges. Nowadays, medieval studies is not always included in some universities' curriculum, and even in some large institutions, few faculty specialize in medieval studies. At my own institution, for example, I'm like the Lone Ranger. You know, it's a university of about 35,000 students, and we actually have, right now, I think we could probably say that we have 3-4 medievalists maximum in all the disciplines in all the colleges. And then the third, talking about weaknesses, let's say, I would say that the work needed, which is not often recognized, we do put it in our CVs, and it is recognized that we're doing this kind of, you know, we're members of an executive committee, or we're presidents and vice presidents of a regional association, but still is obviously not as recognized as if you are the president or the vice president of the, you know, of larger institutions. And the work that the regional association requires is really based on the selfless willingness of our colleagues to serve for very little note, for very little reward. We are very lucky that over the years we've had a numerous number of colleagues that had taken over the, you know, being members of the executive council, being president, vice president, and as you guys said before, some of us have had that category. We've served in that capacity several times. We might have been the president twice or three times. But we have to rely on all of that, and sometimes that's not very recognized. So it makes it more difficult for people to be willing to serve. And we always end up being the same group of devoted people. And we would like to find a formula by which we could attract other people that might not have been involved before. And it's a little difficult to show them the value of that, or the value of that work, and how rewarding it can be, and how necessary it is, so we can continue offering the programming, and we can continue being a place of interaction for medievalists in our area. And lastly, I would say the issue of the graduate students is also, we are here, one of our tasks is to be very supportive of graduate students, but I think sometimes because of graduate students are only in institutions for a couple of years, by the time we can capture them and they can be members of the association, they might be in their last year, and then after a year they disappear. So there is a huge turnaround in positions like the graduate representative at the DVMA, and that's also a problem for us, because, you know, it would be nice to find a way to ensure that they, you know, that they come to us earlier, so that they can be members of that executive council for a longer period. But that's just an issue that we find we struggle with every single year. And the last thing that I wanted to say has to do with communication, that, what's very important for associations like us is to communicate and to actually be able to reach people about our programming. But again, this is the kind of task that it's a thankless task. It's a task that has a lot to do with technology. And many of us are not that familiar with technology. So unless we have a lot of resources and a lot of support from institutions, it's difficult to actually put it it's kind of always in the back burner. We have so many other things to do, so many other commitments, and a lot of times the regional association ends up being the last in the list because we don't have a choice, and that creates a lack in communication. We cannot be up to date all the time. Even for us, we had to revamp our website. It's been a long process. We needed help with this, and finally we've done it, but it's just a lot of work, and there's very few of us doing the work, and that makes our visibility be less constant for our members and for everybody else. And in connection to that, and this is my last thing, I was noticing too, when you guys were talking about this, and Christine was talking about the fact that now you're moving to a situation where there will be more virtual interaction. One thing that, in my personal opinion, would be very interesting is when we organize, for example, it would be, for me at least, it would be very nice to know when you guys are organizing some kind of a webinar or something virtual where members from our organization could also attend. And I think that would help all of us if we had a better contact between all the regional organizations, so that we would know what you guys are doing, and we would make sure that first, that we don't organize webinars for the same dates, for example, or we could actually have members from the Delaware Valley Medieval Association attending your webinars and your virtual events. And I think that would be a positive for all of us. I think we could actually increase the presence of medievalists in all of the associations. Anyway, that's it. I think that's all I had to say.
Wonderful. Thank you, Montserrat. That's really wonderful. The idea that we have a way, we develop some kind of structure to share, especially our hybrid events or virtual participants. And we can think about, how CARA could be, instrumental in making that happen. I would love that. At this moment, I'd like to just open this up for questions, comments from people who've joined us. Also, you're welcome to put some comments in the chat, and I'll try to monitor that, but we are ready to allow you to ask whatever questions or offer suggestions that you may have.
Sorry, that was the cat.
And maybe while people are thinking, I will say that there are two things. One, in last fall, our organization, Mama, has never had a membership fee. So we don't have a great deal of money, and we've always run on a shoestring, just enough to cover costs. And so one of the things I did was a survey. I went to everyone's websites on every organization, and I looked to see what you were doing. And I was thrilled to see like so many prizes, so much bursary support for graduate students. The sort of multiple organizations have their own journal and are sustaining them, which is fantastic. And that clearly having some kind of organizational structure, some kind of an executive committee matters, because ours has been very amorphous, but went back to 3 faculty members who sort of just ran the thing for a long time. And so one of the things we're thinking about is, what kind of executive structure would help? Obviously, a membership fee would be necessary. But we've already sort of said, everybody belongs to Mama. Come to Mama. Everybody's Mama. But now that hasn't really led to us having enough money to fund a reception, or, those sorts of things. So that's one of the things I'm interested in. But if people, especially folks who've joined us today, would be interested, I would be happy to share this website out, and presidents can correct information, and then maybe we can kind of get a sense of like what seems to be working and maybe best, I hate to use the word best practices, but what is a sustaining model for an organization? And maybe it means that there are multiple kinds of events, like Montserrat is talking about, or multiple events. Maybe one of our organizations is running a virtual conference one year, another one is hosting an in-person, and we do some collaborative things, as Ma'am and Mama have been doing the past couple of years. But I think it would be really interesting to see how we might build community among several organizations, especially for folks in Canada, Shannon, who might be clear out in Vancouver, but may want to come to MAP events or to REMRA, or, right? So there may be a way that we can help facilitate that. I see Lauren's hand is up, and you go ahead, Lauren, and I'll take a look at what's in the chat here.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I think I can't turn on my video, but imagine that I'm here. I'm the chair of CARA that Ginny mentioned earlier, and I just want to sort of take this opportunity to say that historically CARA has done the kinds of things that you were all talking about as inhibitive, right? Like we had an in-person conference, for instance, and we have been doing a lot of the kind of pivoting that you all have suggested. So all of our programming is now on Zoom or webinars like this one, and even the in-person event that we have at the Medieval Academy annual meeting was live streamed, and the separate conference was canceled and moved to an online format. So I did just want to say that we're beginning to program next year, 2025-26, and we would love to hear from you all about what it is that you need, specifically parts of regional organizations. And so the kinds of coordinating that Ginny was talking about sounds awesome and sounds like something we can help out with. Having a website that connects you all or that kind of thing is something we could potentially do. But if there are even more specific things that we could do, have a webinar about how to run Wild Apricot, let's say, sort of connecting with Mark's suggestion, right? We are all ears, and you can always email me with those suggestions. I'll put my email in the chat. Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. And I'm glad folks are having great conversation in the chat too. Montserrat, your hand is up.
Yeah. Yeah, you can hear me. Yeah, I was gonna say too that I think, and now I can't find it, but I think I saw a message from Christine saying something. I think it was you saying something about what's harder sometimes is to find hosts for the meeting. Was that you? And I was gonna say
That has been my life for the last 3 years.
For us, the same thing. I mean, because budget, as Virginia said, budget is not always a problem because we can manage with very little. And especially in our case, for example, a lot of times our speakers don't get a stipend. They're willing to come and give a paper, and we don't pay them. Sometimes we do. It depends, how far they come from, let's say. But the budget is not necessarily a deterrent because we can manage. And even in an institution like mine, which it's very hard to get money from Temple, but still, for some things, they'll give you certain amounts that might cover the catering, so that you can always find sources to get a little bit of money for some of the things that we do. So we can manage with a low budget. But the biggest problem is to find people willing to, they get afraid of organizing something. They think that it's so much work, and that's what's difficult sometimes. So I wish there would be a way to ensure them that organizing something, like in our case, on a weekend or on a Friday for 2-3 hours, it's not that big a deal, and that obviously we would help with that. But that's always our problem to find hosts. In the past, it never was a problem. Since the pandemic, it has become an increasing problem for us.
Right. Thank you. And something else just occurred to me, but I wondered if it'd be helpful for people to have sort of a set of documents, like here's the kinds of things you need to do to run a conference. That might help people who are a little bit nervous about taking it on the first time, but like things you can anticipate paperwork that you can remodel and not have to start from scratch again each time. That it may be helpful, like how not to forget the name tags at the last minute, you know, all the things that you run around scurrilously doing for the last 24 hours before the conference comes off. I wonder if we could like share that knowledge so that people who maybe are a little afraid of doing this might be willing to step up, especially if they got to be like the junior support staff to a senior person doing it, and then the next year they take it on, or maybe more paired, you know, sort of collaborative work like that. Shannon.
Well, speaking of expenses, I just wondered if this is a peculiarly Canadian problem and maybe not applicable to you. But for us, one of the things that has happened in Canadian universities is that the conference infrastructure has become one of the ways that they can try to squeeze more money in a problem of financial, let's just say, deficit. And so if you go through the official channels, it can cost tens of thousands of dollars to put on a 3-day conference, which, you know, we don't have that kind of money, nowhere near that kind of money. So we have been able to do it in like either going through the back door and just using department spaces, or in one case this year, we've had somebody effectively donate the fees to us, but we're not going to be able to keep doing that. And so do people have strategies beyond the kind of going through the back door and using departmental spaces for figuring out how to deal with the kinds of, you know, conference fee issues from the institutions, I mean?
I mean, we always go through the back door, is how we do it. We have to find somebody in a department who can do that running around and poking business to get, and sometimes it's a department gives money that then lets you offset those fees. And sometimes, so we're at the library this year at USU, which I'm honestly really excited about because they have special collections and it's going to be fun. But they're able to let us use their space because they are willing to host us. And so we almost always go through the back door or have somebody on the ground who is able to negotiate with deans or department chairs to get internal funding moved around. And I know how to do it, but because I'm not in my region, it's really weird. I've never in my life lived in the Rocky Mountains, and yet I'm the president of RIMRA. And so I can't ever host, even though I know that that's something that I could make happen. So I literally just cold email people and beg. But we also try and, you find people who know people. And so part of the reason why we try and expand our membership is so that we can sucker people on board into doing this in future years. But that requires making sure that you're balancing your graduate, undergraduate contingent faculty with your tenure line faculty, or at least what I will call permanent contingent or senior contingent faculty, who have the ability to do some of that like politicking within the university structure. But we have also been able to leverage it through other existing things. So every 5 years, we work with the Wooden Nose Symposium. They exist permanently at their site. And every so many years, we just work with them. And it increases their numbers, which they like temporarily, although they freaked out a little bit last year because there were a lot of us, a lot more than they usually host. But it was great. It was a great conference. Everything was fabulous. But because they always host it, we were able to sort of sneak in with them to make things happen. And so that's something that we look to do, is actually co-host with other organizations. And that also helps with cost sharing, because very often it's like, okay, we know that we're going to increase our numbers because we have 2 organizations worth of people that will be able to attend this. And so you can keep the cost down and still cover your room rates. So those are sort of the strategies that we do. It's like, yes, backdoor, sometimes front door, but front door plus internal funding and co-hosting with other organizations, either to offset costs or because there is a permanent venue.
That's great. Natalie,
I was going to respond to two of these questions. I've hosted SEMA twice. Wofford is about 1,700 students. It would never occur to anyone on campus to charge room fees. And we have had SEMA at large institutions like UT Knoxville but when we've had it at smaller ones, those fees can go down substantially. So does the layer of bureaucracy. You have less money hypothetically to spend on the conference. But when I hosted it, SEMA is usually over 3 days or so, and we have sessions Thursday afternoon, then all day Friday, and part or all of Saturday. And I would hold all of the Saturday sessions on campus, and all the people who absolutely needed technology would be there, because then there would be no tech fees with the hotel. We would only have 1 or 2 sessions that had technology at the hotels on Thursday and Friday. Hotel, it's our biggest problem because of the kinds of guarantees they want. The idea of having a guide to hosting a conference, we've had one, SEMA has one that's 10 or 12 years old. And if I get permission from the board, I can share it if you like after this, that we have every host update describing, it has a calendar and it has who to contact and how to make your proposal and how to recruit and how to send out calls for papers, etc. So I think it's gotten pretty elaborate over the years.
that would be fantastic. Thank you, Natalie. I'll say that I hosted MAMA in September, and we had a joint meeting with the Medieval Association of the Midwest and the Midwest Medieval History Conference. We had about 100 people, and it was my institution. You can use academic rooms for free. There is no great place for reception. We have such restrictions on alcohol if students are going to be there. And they're just, I have been working with our new vice chancellor for research, trying to explain that, academic institutions, which he does get this, do host conferences. I don't think our president or our chancellor understands that, but he's learning that. So I shared with them all the hoops I jumped through, including worked with a local, and this was great, a nonprofit foundation conference center. They don't charge for the use of the conference center if you're approved, though you do have to use their on-site catering, which was fantastic and very inexpensive. So it ended up being a great conference space right next to our campus, and it was way better than if we'd actually hosted it on our campus itself. But it's a little disappointing to have to tell people, no, the wonderful conference space you're at is not really our university. So yes, finding sites. And then, our model has been to host it 1 year, and the subsequent year, one of our regional universities hosts it. But yes, I'm the same way, constantly looking for who's going to take it up next, who's next on deck. So any and all resources that people have and want to share, that would be fantastic. Do we have any final questions? Or I saw people were answering things in the chat. I know we're just past time, and I want to be mindful of that. Chris, you can keep and save everything in the chats, right? So there's some great information here. Yes, great. All right. And we have notes from Lauren. Any last things before we step off here? I want to say that I feel like this is the opening of a conversation, and I'm really glad to see that there's interest in sharing resources across organizations and finding ways to help sustain each other. I think that's really what I'd hoped would come out of this. Also, I want to thank Kristen, Shannon, Montserrat, and Natalie for being here today, talking about the successes, talking about the challenges and threats, because I think the most sustaining part of what we do year in and year out is finding ways to meet and talk and share our research, but also our frustrations with what we do, but also bringing our students along and getting them to see what's exciting about the work that has obsessed us for so many years. So thank you for your wonderful insights. And I will follow up and we'll get this information out as well as a recording of today's presentation. So thanks again.